The alien queen ruled worlds yet hesitated before one human answer. The galaxy was a vast and tangled network of power, where every star system was ruled by different species, each trying to carve out their own place in the endless expanse. But at the center of it all, one figure stood above the rest, Queen Zalora. Her name was known across hundreds of worlds. Her reach extended beyond what any ruler had ever dared dream. She controlled countless planets, from the frozen wastes of Narvex to the blazing deserts of Eros Prime. No one could challenge her power. Her fleet was unstoppable, her armies unmatched. Queen Zalora was not just a ruler. She was a force of nature, an ancient being who had lived for centuries. She was powerful, cunning, and feared by every species that had ever encountered her. But even she had her moments of doubt, moments when something strange began to stir within her, a sensation she had never expected to feel. In the grand, metallic halls of her flagship, Zalora stood before a massive viewport, staring out into the blackness of space. Her golden eyes glowed softly in the dim light, a silent reflection of her immense power. The stars seemed so distant, so cold, and yet she was the one who commanded the galaxy. She thought back to the events that had led her to this point. For years, Zalora had ruled with an iron fist, crushing rebellions and forging alliances with alien races. She had taken entire systems by force, and no one had dared stand against her. She had never known true resistance until now. A human. Adrian Keller, a diplomat from Earth, had somehow become a thorn in her side. Time and time again, he had outwitted her agents, slipped through her traps, and managed to break through her defenses. He was just one man, but his actions had caused ripples across the galaxy. He had managed to win over several key allies of hers, and worst of all, he had made her question everything she thought she knew about power. Zalora had never experienced such a feeling before. She was the ruler of worlds, the supreme force in the galaxy, and yet one human, one fragile being had made her hesitate. This was not something she was accustomed to. She had never been uncertain about her decisions, never been unsure of her next move. But Adrian Keller was different. He was unpredictable, and that unpredictability unnerved her. Her advisors, the ones who served her loyally, urged her to eliminate him. "He is a threat to your reign, your majesty," they said. "One human cannot be allowed to stand in your way. We will crush him." But Zalora had hesitated. She had never allowed emotion to cloud her judgment. She had always been cold and calculating, but something about Adrian Keller made her pause. He didn't fear her. He didn't fear anything. He was a human, a species she had considered weak and insignificant. Yet, every time she encountered him, she found herself at a loss. How could one such as him challenge her so? Her hands gripped the railing in front of her, and she turned away from the viewport, her mind racing. She had made the decision to bring him before her, to face him in person. She had to understand why he refused to bow to her, why he had caused such unrest among her allies. But this wasn't just a matter of diplomacy or strategy. No, it was something deeper. She needed to know what it was about him that made him stand apart from all the other beings she had encountered. What made him tick? She summoned her generals, her closest advisors, to discuss the matter. They arrived promptly in the chamber, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Zalora's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I want him brought to me," she ordered. "Prepare for his arrival." One of her advisors, a tall, green-skinned reptilian named Draxer, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, are you certain? He is but one human. Surely it would be more efficient to eliminate him before he can cause further disruption." Zalora's eyes narrowed, her golden gaze locking onto Draxer's. "I did not ask for your opinion, Draxer. I will meet with him. Prepare the spaceport for his arrival. This is not up for debate." The advisor bowed, though the doubt still lingered in his eyes. The others remained silent, understanding the gravity of the Queen's words. As the preparations were made, Zalora found herself unable to shake the unease that had settled over her. She had never faced such a situation before. She had never been unsure of her own power. But now, for the first time, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. What would she find when she faced this human? Would he continue to defy her, or would he fall to his knees and beg for mercy, like the countless others who had tried and failed before him? The more she thought about it, the more intrigued she became. It wasn't just his defiance that fascinated her, it was the way he carried himself. He was not like other species she had encountered. Humans, in her experience, were weak and short-lived, but Adrian Keller was different. He had somehow survived her most dangerous agents and turned them against her. He had survived the traps set by her most skilled strategists. But what truly baffled her was that, in the face of certain death, he had never once shown fear. Zalora's mind flashed back to their last encounter. She had sent her best assassin, a cold-blooded killer known as Vorin, to deal with him. But when Vorin returned, bruised and battered, he brought back a message. Adrian Keller had bested him. The man was a master of tactics, a strategist in his own right. He had outwitted Vorin with ease. Zalora's hand tightened around the armrest of her throne as she recalled Vorin's report. She had been furious when she heard the news, but deep down, there had been a flicker of admiration. This human had something she had not expected, something that made him stand out from the rest. As the hours passed and the preparations for Adrian's arrival continued, Zalora felt an odd sense of anticipation. What would she learn from him? What would he reveal about his species that she did not already know? She had conquered countless worlds, but this human, this one man, had managed to defy her in ways no one else had. When the time finally came, Zalora stood before the grand door of the meeting chamber, waiting for Adrian Keller to enter. The space was vast, its walls lined with shimmering alien symbols. The air was thick with tension. Her generals and advisors stood at attention, their gazes fixed on her, awaiting her orders. The door creaked open, and Adrian Keller stepped inside, his expression calm and confident. He was tall, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his blue eyes locked onto hers with an unwavering intensity. He was human, and yet in that moment he seemed as formidable as any of the galaxy's greatest warriors. Zalora studied him carefully, her eyes scanning his every move. She had expected him to cower before her, to show fear, but instead he stood tall, unflinching, as if he were facing an equal. The nerve of this human to look her in the eye without a hint of fear. "Adrian Keller," Zalora said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "You've caused quite a stir across my empire. Tell me, why do you resist? What is it about humanity that makes you think you can stand against me?" Adrian didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a small, confident smile. "Because, Your Majesty, we don't give up. We fight when all hope seems lost." Zalora felt a strange stirring inside her. She had expected many things, but not this. This human, standing before her, was a puzzle she was determined to solve. The chamber grew silent as Adrian Keller stood across from Queen Zalora, her sharp golden eyes studying him, with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. Her gaze was cold and calculating as it had always been, yet there was something different in the way she looked at him, something almost curious. Adrian didn't flinch under her gaze. Instead, he remained calm, his stance firm, as though he had been in the presence of rulers far more dangerous than her. To him, the vastness of space and the threat of an alien queen didn't matter. It was just another challenge, another test, and he was ready for it. Zalora's mind raced as she looked at the human standing before her. She had expected him to be overwhelmed by the grandness of her presence, to cower in fear like so many others. But he didn't. His confidence was unsettling. His quiet defiance was something she had never experienced, and she didn't know whether to admire it or crush it immediately. "Why do you resist?" she repeated, her voice a smooth, almost musical sound, but with an edge that carried the weight of authority. You, a mere human, have no place in my empire. You have no power to change anything, yet you continue to defy me. Why? Adrian met her gaze and didn't hesitate in his reply. Because humanity values freedom, your majesty. We don't bend to anyone, no matter how powerful they are. No matter how much they threaten us, we fight because it's in our nature. Zalora's mind flashed to his last words, to the calmness with which he spoke. In all her years, no one had ever defied her with such resolve. She had ruled countless worlds, driven by fear and control, but here stood a human who spoke not with fear but with certainty. There was no submission in him, not even a hint of it. Zalora found herself intrigued by him. Why did he stand so boldly? What made him so different from all the other beings she had encountered, beings who fell to their knees before her in terror? Your kind is insignificant, Zalora said, her voice lowering, the edge of command returning. You are weak. You have no hope of defeating me. Adrian shook his head, his eyes unwavering. You're wrong. Strength isn't about size or power. It's about determination. It's about fighting when everything tells you to give up. He paused, then added, and that's something humanity has in abundance. Zalora's eyes narrowed. She had never encountered someone like him. The usual threats, the promises of death, the overwhelming power, none of it seemed to faze him. It was almost as if he wasn't scared of dying. But why? What was it about this human that made him stand so firmly in front of her? A silence fell between them as both of them considered each other. Zalora was calculating, weighing her options. She could easily order him to be executed. But something in her, something that she hadn't experienced in a long time, told her to pause. This human was more than a nuisance. He was a puzzle. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice no longer the icy edge of a queen, but something more uncertain. Adrian thought for a moment. I don't want anything from you, your majesty. I want to show you something. I want to show you what humanity is truly capable of. Zalora arched an eyebrow. She had expected him to beg for mercy or offer her some sort of truce. But no, instead, he was offering something else, something she hadn't anticipated. You think I'm going to spare your life because of your words? She asked, her voice cold again, though there was still that odd sense of curiosity beneath it. No, Adrian said calmly. I don't expect you to spare me. I don't expect you to do anything I ask. But I will prove to you that your empire doesn't hold the true strength in this galaxy. Humanity does. Zalora laughed, a sound that was rich with power but also with a hint of disbelief. You are bold, human. I will give you that, but words are not enough to defeat me. You will see that soon enough. She signaled to one of her guards, and the large doors of the chamber swung open, revealing a line of her most trusted warriors. They were a mix of species, fierce, dangerous, and highly trained in combat. Some were larger than Zalora herself, their muscles bulging under the armor, while others were lithe and quick, their movements like a blur. Zalora turned her attention back to Adrian. I will give you a chance, human. If you can survive a test, one of my choosing, then I will hear more of your words, but if you fail, you will die. Adrian's face remained impassive. He didn't flinch. I accept. Zalora's lips curled into a smile. She was curious to see how he would fare against her warriors. She had no doubt that he would fail, just like everyone else who had come before him. But part of her wondered, just a tiny part, if he could actually do something unexpected. Perhaps he was more than just words. The warriors stepped forward and Zalora gave a slight nod. The test would begin. The humans she had studied were often resilient, but they were no match for the power of the galaxy's strongest races. Adrian would be crushed under the weight of her warriors, and her doubts would be put to rest. Begin, Zalora ordered. The first warrior lunged at Adrian, a massive figure with a heavily armored exoskeleton. The warrior swung a large battle axe, a weapon designed to cut through the toughest armor. Adrian dodged the blow, his movements swift, almost too fast for the naked eye. The warrior swung again, but this time, Adrian used his opponent's momentum against him. With a quick motion, he disarmed the warrior and knocked him to the ground. The crowd of Zalora's guards gasped. This was no ordinary human. Adrian had moved with a speed and precision that defied logic, but the queen remained calm, though her eyes betrayed the slightest hint of surprise. The second warrior charged at Adrian, faster than the first. This one was smaller, more agile, and carried dual blades. Adrian barely had time to react as the warrior slashed at him, but he managed to roll out of the way just in time. He kicked the warrior's legs out from under him and sent him crashing to the ground. Zalora's heart beat faster. She had not expected him to be so skilled in combat. Every move Adrian made was calculated, deliberate. The humans she had studied were supposed to be fragile, weak, easy targets for those with real power. Yet here was one of them, outmatching her strongest warriors. The remaining warriors hesitated, sensing the change in the air. They had been trained to believe that no one could stand against Zalora's might, but this human was proving them wrong. Zalora's eyes narrowed. She had to end this. With a flick of her wrist, she signaled for the next phase. Out of the shadows, a new figure appeared, her personal assassin Vorin. He was a creature of pure death, a being who had been trained since birth to be a killing machine. His speed and strength were beyond human comprehension. He moved like a shadow, and his weapons were lethal, designed to pierce the strongest of armor. "Let's see how your human resolve holds up against him," Zalora said, her voice barely a whisper but her eyes fixed on Adrian. Adrian stood tall, facing Vorin. This would be his biggest challenge yet, and as he took a deep breath, he knew that this moment could change everything. Adrian stood still, his breath steady despite the growing tension in the chamber. Vorin, the queen's personal assassin, stepped into the light. The creature's body was sleek, moving with an unnatural grace, its black armor blending into the shadows. The assassin's eyes glowed an eerie red, a sign of the enhancement that allowed it to track and eliminate its targets with precision. Adrian knew he was facing the most dangerous opponent he had encountered so far. Zalora watched from her throne, her golden eyes narrowing with anticipation. She had witnessed countless battles, but this was different. Adrian Keller, the human who had defied her, had already outmatched her best warriors. Now he faced Vorin, a being who had been bred for this very purpose. Zalora was certain that no human could survive this. For a moment the two opponents stood motionless, sizing each other up. Adrian's eyes never left Vorin, his body relaxed but ready. His mind raced as he analyzed his opponent. He knew that a direct fight with Vorin would be suicide. The assassin was too fast, too powerful. But Adrian had something the assassin didn't: adaptability. The ability to think in the heat of the moment, to use the environment around him in ways Vorin wouldn't expect. Vorin made the first move, disappearing into a blur of motion. Adrian barely had time to react as the assassin's blades flashed through the air. The two swords came at him from opposite directions, each one aimed at a vital point. But Adrian was already moving, rolling to the side just as Vorin's blades missed by inches. The chamber was filled with the sound of rushing footsteps and the sharp ring of metal. Zalora leaned forward in her throne, her gaze fixed on Adrian. She had expected him to fail, but he was proving her wrong again. For every strike Vorin made, Adrian was there, dodging, weaving, staying just out of reach. Adrian's mind was working at lightning speed. He didn't have the strength or speed to outmatch Vorin in direct combat, but he had something else: strategy. He needed to get Vorin to make a mistake to create an opening. The assassin's moves were calculated, precise, but also predictable. Every attack followed the same pattern: a quick strike, then a retreat to reassess. Adrian knew he had to exploit that. With a sudden move, Vorin lunged forward, his twin blades aimed at Adrian's chest. Adrian didn't dodge this time. Instead, he used his opponent's momentum against him. With a quick pivot, he stepped aside and used the assassin's own speed to push him off balance. Vorin staggered for a brief moment, just enough for Adrian to take action. Adrian's fist connected with Vorin's side, knocking the wind out of him. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it gave Adrian the opening he needed. He spun around, grabbing a nearby metal rod from the floor and using it to block the assassin's next strike. The clash of metal echoed through the chamber as Adrian swung the rod with all his strength, pushing Vorin back. Zalora's eyes widened. The human was not just surviving, he was holding his own. For the first time, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. This was not how things were supposed to go. Her assassin, the perfect killer, was being challenged by a human. She watched with growing curiosity. How long could Adrian keep this up? Vorin recovered quickly, but Adrian was already on the move. He took a step back, watching Vorin closely, waiting for the next move. The assassin was faster, stronger, and more skilled in combat, but Adrian had the one thing that made him unpredictable. He could think on his feet. He didn't rely on raw power or speed. He relied on his ability to adapt. Adrian feinted to the left, drawing Vorin's attention. As the assassin swung his blades, Adrian ducked and rolled, coming up behind Vorin. With a swift strike, he kicked the assassin's legs out from under him, sending Vorin crashing to the floor. The crowd of guards around the chamber gasped. The human was not only surviving, he was winning. Zalora leaned back in her throne, her fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. She had never seen anything like this. Adrian Keller was proving to be a force to be reckoned with. The more she observed him, the more she realized that this human was not like any other. He wasn't driven by fear, by pride, or by power. He was driven by something else, something she couldn't quite place. Vorin was on his feet again, but this time he was slower, more cautious. The assassin knew he couldn't underestimate Adrian. The fight was far from over, and it was clear that this human had more tricks up his sleeve. Adrian didn't wait for Vorin to make the next move. He attacked first, rushing forward with a speed that caught the assassin off guard. Vorin parried the strike, but Adrian was already moving, shifting his position and delivering a quick jab to the assassin's side. The blow wasn't enough to incapacitate Vorin, but it made him stumble. Adrian used the momentary distraction to his advantage, pressing his attack. The two combatants clashed again, their blades ringing against each other. For every strike Vorin made, Adrian had an answer. He wasn't the strongest, but he was relentless. His movements were quick and unpredictable, always keeping Vorin on the defensive. Zalora watched with growing fascination. Adrian wasn't just surviving, he was adapting, evolving with each moment. The assassin's skill, while unmatched by most standards, was beginning to look clumsy in comparison to Adrian's quick thinking. Vorin's eyes flashed with frustration. He had been trained to kill without hesitation, to end his opponents swiftly and efficiently. But Adrian was different. This human was relentless, refusing to back down even in the face of death. Vorin knew that he had to end the fight soon, or he would lose. With a roar, Vorin surged forward, his blades slicing through the air at lightning speed. Adrian barely had time to react as the assassin's blades slashed across his side, drawing blood. The pain was sharp, but Adrian didn't stop. He gritted his teeth and pushed through, his focus unwavering. He couldn't afford to slow down now. Adrian launched himself at Vorin with renewed determination. The assassin's blades were faster than ever, but Adrian was quicker, ducking and weaving through the deadly swings. He needed to end this fight, and he needed to do it quickly. The longer it went on, the more dangerous Vorin would become. In a final, desperate move, Adrian feigned an attack to the left, drawing Vorin's attention. The assassin took the bait, swinging his blades in a wide arc. But Adrian wasn't there. He was already behind Vorin, his hands gripping the assassin's arm and twisting it with all his strength. Vorin stumbled, his weapons falling from his hands as Adrian forced him to the ground. The chamber fell silent. Zalora's heart raced. Adrian had done it. He had defeated Vorin. Adrian stood over the fallen assassin, breathing heavily, his body aching from the fight. Blood dripped from his side, but he didn't care. He had won. And for the first time, he saw the Queen's face, not just as a ruler, but as a being who was now facing something she had never expected. Zalora stood up, her eyes never leaving Adrian. There was no anger in her gaze, no desire for vengeance. Instead, there was something more, something unexpected. "You have impressed me, human," Zalora said, her voice cold but with a hint of respect. "No one has ever survived Vorin's test. You are stronger than I anticipated." Adrian didn't respond immediately. He was still catching his breath, his mind racing. He had won, but he knew that this was only the beginning. Zalora was not someone to be taken lightly, and the true battle was yet to come. But for now, he had proven something, not just to her, but to himself. And that, for Adrian Keller, was enough. The chamber was filled with an eerie stillness after the intense battle. Zalora stood tall in her throne, her golden eyes never leaving Adrian, who was panting heavily, but standing with an air of quiet determination. The tension in the room was palpable, and though Adrian had just defeated her finest assassin, the Queen's expression betrayed nothing. But beneath her composed exterior, something was stirring. Zalora had always been the one in control. She had never allowed anyone to challenge her authority, let alone survive a battle against one of her deadliest warriors. But Adrian Keller, this human, was different. He had shown resilience, intelligence, and a will that was nearly unbreakable. As she studied him, something she had not felt in years began to rise within her: respect. It was a small, subtle thing, but it was there nonetheless. Adrian stood in the center of the chamber, his body aching from the fight, but his mind sharp. He had been trained to fight, to think in high-pressure situations, but he had never expected to face an opponent like Zalora. She was unlike any adversary he had ever encountered. She was powerful, ancient, and most frighteningly, she had no apparent weakness. Yet Adrian had done what seemed impossible. He had defeated her assassin, and in doing so had earned her attention, something that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Zalora motioned to her guards, signaling them to stand down. Her voice, when it came, was colder than before, but with an edge that wasn't there earlier. "You have done something no other has ever done," she said, her words deliberate and measured. "You have survived my test. You have defeated Vorin. Few can claim such a feat. But that is not enough to earn my respect." Adrian wiped the sweat from his brow, his gaze still locked on the Queen. "Respect isn't something that's earned by fear or power," he replied, his voice calm but unwavering. "It's earned by standing firm in the face of adversity, by never giving up no matter what." Zalora's eyes narrowed, her sharp gaze studying Adrian like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. She had expected him to boast, to revel in his victory, but instead he seemed indifferent. He wasn't celebrating, he wasn't pleading for mercy. He was simply stating facts. "You speak as though you know something about strength, human," Zalora said, her voice now tinged with both amusement and something deeper, something unfamiliar. "But strength is more than determination. It is power. It is domination. I have ruled galaxies, commanded fleets of ships, and crushed rebellions without hesitation. You are nothing compared to the forces I control." Adrian's expression remained unchanged. "Then maybe you're right. Maybe power is everything to you, but where does it get you? What's the point of ruling if there's no one to rule with you? What good is power if you have no one to share it with?" Zalora's lips curled into a smile that held no humor. "You do not understand. You cannot understand. I have lived for centuries, and I have seen the destruction of entire civilizations. Power is what keeps the universe in balance. Without it, chaos reigns." Adrian took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Maybe, but there's a difference between balance and oppression. You don't rule because you want to bring order. You rule because you're afraid of losing control." The Queen's expression darkened at his words. Adrian's words cut deeper than he realized. She had never admitted it to herself, but she knew, deep down, that he was right. Fear had always been the driving force behind her reign. The fear of losing what she had built, the fear of being overthrown, the fear that all she had ever known could be destroyed. She had always ruled with an iron fist, but in doing so, she had isolated herself from the very thing that made a kingdom strong: trust. Zalora clenched her fists, her thoughts swirling. It had been a long time since anyone had dared challenge her so directly. But this human, this Adrian Keller, was doing more than challenging her authority. He was making her question everything. He had not come to her to beg for mercy, to beg for his life. He had come to show her something she had never considered before, the idea that there was more to life than power. For the first time, Zalora felt uncertain. "You have a bold spirit, human," Zalora said, her voice tinged with a new kind of respect. "But you are naive. The galaxy does not work like you think. It is a place of survival, of strength. You cannot change the way things are." Adrian shook his head, taking another step forward. "Maybe I can't change the galaxy all by myself, but I can change the way I see it. I can change the way we treat each other. That's what humans do, we adapt. We fight, we survive, and we find a way to make things better, even when everything seems impossible." Zalora looked at him for a long moment. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, everything she had built in her mind beginning to crumble. She had never considered what he was saying, had never allowed herself to even entertain the idea that there might be another way. She had always thought that control was the answer, that domination was the key to peace. But now, standing before this human, she wondered if she had been wrong all along. "You speak of things I do not understand," Zalora said, her voice softening ever so slightly. "You speak of hope, of change. These are not concepts I am familiar with." "I can teach you," Adrian replied, his voice steady. "It's not easy and it won't happen overnight, but it's worth trying." Zalora's eyes flashed with something unreadable. She had never allowed anyone to speak to her like this, to offer her something so simple. The idea of change was foreign to her, and yet, in the presence of this human, it felt almost possible. A long silence passed between them. Zalora found herself lost in thought. She had seen the destruction that came from rebellion, from trying to break free of her rule. She had seen entire civilizations fall. But Adrian was right. Her power had come at a cost. She had isolated herself, ruled with fear, and in doing so had created a universe where no one dared stand up to her. Was that truly peace? Or was it just a fragile illusion? Adrian broke the silence. "You don't have to do this alone, Your Majesty. There's more to leadership than domination. There's more to power than fear. You don't have to keep fighting for control. You can build something better." Zalora stood still, her gaze fixed on him. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of doubt. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't fear. It was something different, something unfamiliar. It was the possibility of change. The Queen took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had always believed that power was the only thing that mattered. But now, standing before this human, this strange, unyielding human, she realized that there was more at stake than just her empire. There was something greater, something more important. "What are you asking of me?" Zalora finally asked, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Adrian met her gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet confidence. "I'm asking you to trust me, to consider the possibility that there's a different way. A way where power is shared, not hoarded. A way where strength is measured by compassion, not fear." Zalora's heart raced as she took in his words. She had never considered the possibility that such a thing was possible. But in the silence of the chamber, as she looked at Adrian, she felt something shift within her. For the first time, the Queen of Galaxies began to question her reign. The room was silent as the weight of Adrian's words hung in the air. Zalora stood motionless, her eyes fixed on him. The Queen had never allowed herself to entertain such thoughts before, never questioned the path she had walked for centuries. Her reign had been built on fear and power, and that was how she had maintained control. But now, as she stood in the presence of this human, this unexpected adversary, everything she thought she knew seemed uncertain. Adrian's gaze never wavered. He wasn't demanding anything from her. He wasn't pleading for his life or trying to manipulate her. He had simply spoken the truth that he believed in, the truth that had carried humanity through countless trials and struggles. It was a truth that Zalora had never considered. "You really believe that?" Zalora asked quietly, her voice softer than it had been before. "That there is another way," Adrian nodded, his expression calm but firm. "I do. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's worth it. We've made mistakes, sure, but humanity has always found a way to get back up and keep fighting, not just for survival but for something better." Zalora remained silent, her golden eyes studying him carefully. Her mind raced as she thought about everything that had brought her to this point, the countless worlds she had conquered, the countless beings she had crushed beneath her boot. She had done it all in the name of control, in the name of peace through power. But now she wasn't so sure. She had seen the galaxy bend to her will, but she had never once stopped to consider what that meant. What had she truly built? Was it peace? Or was it a fragile empire held together by fear? She had never thought about it that way before. Adrian took a step forward, his voice gentle but unyielding. "You don't have to be alone in this, Zalora. You don't have to carry the weight of the galaxy by yourself. Power doesn't have to come from fear. It can come from trust, from cooperation, from understanding." Zalora's heart raced as she absorbed his words. Trust, cooperation, understanding. These were concepts she had dismissed as weaknesses. She had ruled with an iron fist because that was the only way she knew how. But now, Adrian was showing her a different path. A path that didn't involve domination, that didn't require her to be feared. A path where power could be shared, not hoarded. For the first time, Zalora found herself questioning everything she had built. She turned away from him, her back to Adrian as she walked toward the vast viewport that overlooked the galaxy. The stars were distant, cold, and unfeeling. But for the first time, they seemed to represent something more than just her empire. They represented a vast universe, full of potential, a universe that had never been given the chance to thrive under her rule. "I have ruled for so long," Zalora said softly, almost to herself. "For centuries I have held this empire together, but I have done so by destroying anyone who stood in my way. I have sacrificed so much, so many lives." Adrian stepped closer, his voice steady but compassionate. "You've done what you thought was necessary. But that doesn't mean you can't change. It doesn't mean you can't find another way." Zalora closed her eyes, her mind swirling with doubts and fears. She had built her empire from the ground up. She had fought wars, crushed rebellions, and wiped out entire civilizations. She had done all of it in the name of peace, in the name of order. But now, for the first time, she saw that the peace she had created was an illusion. It was a peace that had been built on fear, and fear alone. Turning to face Adrian again, she spoke quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I have always believed that control is the only way to keep the peace, but now I see that maybe I was wrong." Adrian's expression softened. "It's not too late, Zalora. You don't have to keep ruling with fear. You don't have to keep doing this alone." Zalora stood there for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always seen herself as the ultimate authority, the one who held the power over life and death. But now she was beginning to understand that true power wasn't about domination. It wasn't about crushing those beneath her. True power came from understanding, from connection, from lifting others up rather than holding them down. "I've been so afraid," she said, her voice almost breaking. "Afraid of losing everything I've built, afraid of being weak." "You're not weak," Adrian said, his voice firm. "You're stronger than you realize. Strength isn't about control. It's about knowing when to let go. It's about trusting others. And most of all, it's about believing in the possibility of something better." Zalora looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. But there was none. She saw only sincerity. For the first time, she wondered if maybe there was more to humanity than she had ever given them credit for. They weren't just weak creatures, as she had always thought. They were resilient, adaptable, and capable of more than she had imagined. Zalora's gaze shifted to the stars once again. The universe seemed so vast, so full of potential. For so long, she had believed that she was the only one who could hold it all together. But now, she realized that she didn't have to do it alone. She didn't have to rule with fear. There was another way. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the smooth surface of the viewport. The stars, once distant and cold, now seemed to offer a glimpse of something new, something she had never allowed herself to see before. "I want to change," Zalora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know where to start." Adrian smiled, a warmth in his eyes. "It starts with trust. It starts with opening your mind to the possibility of something different. And it starts with believing that you don't have to control everything." Zalora nodded slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She had ruled for so long, driven by fear and the need for control. But now, standing before this human, she saw a different way. A way that didn't involve crushing everything in her path, but instead building something greater, something that didn't rely on fear. "I will try," Zalora said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. "I will try to see the galaxy in a different light." Adrian nodded, a quiet smile crossing his face. "That's all anyone can ask for." The two of them stood there for a moment, side by side, looking out at the stars. The vastness of the universe seemed to stretch out before them, full of endless possibilities. And for the first time in centuries, Zalora felt something she had never felt before: hope. She wasn't alone anymore. The galaxy, once ruled by fear, now seemed to hold the promise of something more, a future where power was shared, where strength came from unity, not domination. It was a future that Zalora had never considered, but one that she was now willing to embrace. Together, human and queen, they would shape a new destiny for the galaxy. One where fear no longer ruled, and where the true strength of all beings, human and alien alike, could be realized. And for the first time in a long time, Zalora felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could be better than she had ever imagined.